to the final session of the first day of 18 Sustainability Summit. I welcome you all for the enriching discussion on corporates leading sustainability. I welcome all our distinguished speakers for the session to join us on the dais, please. I request our Chair and Moderator, Ms. Madhulika Sharma, Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer, ITC, to initiate the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks. So obviously, this has been a long day and so many sessions, and you can see the aftermath of it. So in the morning, getting the front seat was so very challenging. And now you see that there are no takers for the front seat, which is a reflection for the long day, but I'm sure it has been a day of learning. It has been for me. So can I suggest to bring back some energy? Let's all get up, stand up, shake ourselves. If you want to do a stretch. Take a 2-second break. I think we can all do with that. And yeah, and if people are, yes. And if people are indulging me, some takers for the front seat also. Thanks everyone. Take your seat, take back your seat. Thanks everyone. Yes. Coming back to the topic with which I've been, given the responsibility. So you've heard throughout the day, sustainability, and that too an inclusive, sustainable, and whatever not, it's written up back there. It means a lot of things, right? And it's a plethora of things, multiple aspects, all covering around environment, social, and governance. And we have heard, throughout the day, we have heard about some of the global concerns which are there, which all the large organizations are also, they are challenged with, like climate change, poverty, humanity, all of those things. But there were also discussions on solutions. So we heard about, deep decarbonization, we heard about mobility, we heard about how the finances could flow, we also heard about, some of the governance and social subjects like diversity, inclusion, food security. So it was a day long of learning, I'm sure, a day long of immense discussions, conversations. But this set of people sitting here, actually just imagine their, dilemma as well as their responsibility, because all of us represent sustainability in our functions, in our organizations, which means that it's a huge challenge for us. This subject is ever evolving. You have to be on top of things. You have to be, reading new things every day and expecting to make, glib answers, very smart answers, knowing that you know everything about it, and also action upon it. And your stakeholders, it is a lot of internal stakeholders. I'm saying from a perspective of ITC, the organization which I represent. It's one legal entity, but 12 different business divisions. So to even, socialize a subject, it requires so much of efforts. Internal stakeholders, and then there are a set of external stakeholders who are expecting you to be the movers and shakers. So it's a huge round of responsibility that is there on our shoulders. But believe it, I love it. I've been working in this domain for the last 8 years, and I'm sure all of us sitting here will say the same. We don't want to leave this fraternity. Having said so, it's very important, and as you have heard throughout the day, you have understood that and this is my 7th year at this summit. Of this 18 years I've been coming here, this is my 7th year. And I've seen how the conversations have moved and how the participation has moved from being a fringe subject, from being one of the functions in the organization, to actually being a function, to actually being a conversation right in the room, boardroom, actually. It's moved from a fringe reporting disclosure to a boardroom discussion. And that is where sustainability now is no longer a buzzword. I think all of us have this cognizance. And it actually requires to be mainstreamed. It actually requires to be the business models of the organizations that we represent. And for ITC, we have our strategy is on we have a 6-pillar strategy, and sustainability is the central pillar, actually. And that's how we are able to, articulate a vision encompassing all these material issues that you have heard about today, and then creating a strategy, an action plan which can be cascaded, and also KPI which we can measure, monitor, and review so that we can do an effective disclosure at the end of the year. So that's a huge amount of work. And now what but I don't want to now do a lot of talking, but here a lot of stalwarts who are sitting here with me, representing organizations which are equally large as ITC and even larger, global footprints. And what does it all mean for all of them? So I'll just introduce my panelists. I have with me Ms. Michelle Lemons. She heads business sustainability and also the CTO for APAC region TCS. Juhi, she is the Sustainability Director, South Asia Markets for Tetra Pak. Mr. P.S. Narayan, he's the Global Head Sustainability and Managing Trustee, Wipro. Bipin Odhikar, he's Head Sustainability, EHS and Operation Excellence for Marico. And Mr. Jayant Roy, he's the Managing Director, Lindstorm. So what how we are going to have this session is, I'm going to request my panelists to do a brief 3 to 4 minutes about their organizations, their material issues, and how have they operationalized this material issues into their functions. And then, we'll have a round of Q&A, and if time permits and if we have a good audience, we'll try to do at least a couple of questions at the end of the session. So I'll start with Michelle. Michelle, over to you, and how about this complex subject, how are you operationalizing it in TCS, and how do you see it from your vantage point?
Thanks very much, Madhulika. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon, and thanks for hanging around for the last session. Madhulika, as you said, I wouldn't be doing anything else at this point in time other than working in sustainability. And so let me share a couple of perspectives with you as a champion of sustainability, of innovation, and of transformation. And a thank you to CII as well for the opportunity. So I haven't been to Delhi to one of these conferences, but I've spoken in Singapore and Australia for them on similar veins. So a great, rich group of thought leadership individuals we have in front of us, and organisations that are championing the change that we need to, as well as, of course, the respective panellists that I'm able to join. So let me cut through and share a little bit about TCS and Tata in the perspective of championing a greener and cleaner, more sustainable future, and equitable for the planet and our people. So we're really looking to embed sustainability into the strategy, and I want to talk very quickly through TCS, our ambitions and actions, Tata, and some of Project Alingana that some of you may have heard about, and then talk about how we work with our customers. And so very briefly, let me talk about our ambitions. So clearly we've set net zero targets for 2030, and we understand in the way that we're building in our KPIs across the footprint that we create of the need to progressively set targets and update those with progressive information. And so we've been reporting since 2006, 2007 using GRI standards and frameworks. Within that, while we've got net zero targets, we've obviously got targets around waste and water and biodiversity on the campuses that we have, as well as employee health and safety and communities, without a doubt. But we've also set interim targets. So we have a 70% reduction target by 2025. And in 2022, in APAC, we achieved that first step of carbon neutrality. I could go into many more target things around the TCS, but what I wanted to also say is we believe digital and innovation is very key to companies achieving their sustainability outcomes. It's an integral enabler, and most organizations are still at those beginning stages of looking at it. And so if I switch quickly to Tata, our chairman talked about sustainability being the biggest single challenge that we're facing for the next couple of decades. Back in 2021, he got together and did deep dives with 7 of the company's largest contributors from emissions, about 99%, around fresh water use, which was around 94% of the company's emissions, the group's emissions, and 99% of solid waste. And those companies were, as you would envisage, steel, power, motor, chemicals, JLR, TCS, and also the consumer products. And so last year we launched a program called Project Alingana. And it really brings together three key areas: our approach to planet resilience, our approach to net zero by 2045, and also how we will secure that future by innovating today. Amongst that, there were three key pillars. One's around decarbonisation in our core businesses, another around circularity and bringing that in. And so we've set targets around all of these, but I just don't have the time to go into them today. And the last one then was around biodiversity. I wanted to really quickly switch to an example of an ecosystem play. So all of us know in part of our roles that achieving the sustainability outcomes that we need to be done as part of an ecosystem, and it's the only way for us to scale the transformation required. So you may have heard of a program called Universe, EV at the middle of that, and it's really something initiated by Tata Motors of bringing together the collective knowledge and action across 7 to 8 Tata companies. The aim is to clearly accelerate the adoption of EV, but also accelerate the reduction of emissions. So Motors' role is pretty clear. Power, the EV charging network, chemicals around batteries and recycling, TCS around the advanced technical research, whether that be product design, but also around e-mobility and how vehicles will work in the future, and many others. And I wanted to highlight this because it was a really good example of operationalising decarbonisation and net zero, where you have Tata Motors putting in place collaborations that will help them achieve their goals, and also those goals by 2040 for passenger vehicles and 2045 for commercial vehicles. I'll go into TCS at a later point, but clearly we do have over 200 solutions that help our customers with their sustainability solutions. And that's everything from disclosure, which is an easy one, through to supply chain rethinks, through to climate risk assessments, life cycle assessments, you'd name that. But that rethink end-to-end across a business with a long-term perspective and an outside view of the impact that you're creating is really critical, and where we see customers working together.
Thanks, Michelle. As I said, that's a lot. Moving now from a technology company, I'm moving to Juhi, who represents a packaging company. Juhi, over to you.
Thank you, Madhulika. At the outset, let me thank CII for sharing my experiences and also learning from other industry experts. I think this is a very good platform where we can share best practices which we can replicate in our organizations to create impact on ground. Sustainability, as Madhulika said, has assumed center stage. It is part of the boardroom discussions. Companies who are looking at long-term growth opportunities with a competitive edge needs to embed sustainability in its business strategy. It needs to be the purpose within the organization, and that too, it should not be driven only by a function which is sustainability. The entire organization needs to drive what we call sustainability. At our organization, Tetra Pak, our vision and mission is to protect what's good, which is food, people, and planet, which is based on the triple bottom line principle, stemmed from the expectations of our customers, and also ESG issues which are material to our industry. Tetra Pak is one of the leading packaging and processing company, and we are focused on creating resilient food systems, focusing on 3 interconnected areas. The first one is decarbonization of our value chain. The second one is driving a circular economy. And the third one is protecting and restoring biodiversity. While I'll talk about some of the specific packaging interventions that Tetra Pak has been engaged in, let me start by talking about what our climate goals are and some of the efforts that we are doing in order to mitigate those climate emissions. We have a net zero goal. By 2030, we are going to get it in our own operations. And by 2050, we are going to do it for the entire value chain. In the last 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, we've been able to reduce 70% of our operational footprint by decoupling growth with carbon emissions. So while we are working on these goals, there are 4 key areas that we've identified. On the downstream, maximum emissions that are coming is from the equipments, the packaging and processing equipments that we have sold to our customers, which they are using in their own operations. So about 57% of our emissions come from there, and 7% comes from the end of life of used cartons, which are not recycled. So we are working on efforts to mitigate that. On an upstream, there is basically our emissions come from raw material that we are sourcing and transportation. And also only 1% of our emissions is coming from our own operations. So some of the efforts that we are doing in terms of mitigation is we are also committed to RE100. We have doubling down on our solar deployment, and we are hopeful of achieving RE100 by 2030. On the supplier side, we have a campaign called Join Us in Protecting the Planet, where 90% of our base material suppliers are part of, and the commitment is to reduce their GHG emissions by 50% by 2030. Also, we are working on introducing more polymer, which is not fossil-based, but rather plant-based in our offerings, which is not only going to help us make renewable offerings, but also reduce our carbon emissions. So those are some of the initiatives that we are doing. And apart from that, there is a lot of effort that the organization is doing in terms of cultivating that culture of awareness within its own people to drive sustainability.
Thanks, Juhi. I'll quickly move to Mr. Narayan.
Thank you, Madhulika. You've set the context very well, so I think we can jump straight into the essentials of each of us and the way our company has moved in the sustainability journey. Before that, I've been part of the CII Sustainability Summit for the last, I think probably for the last 10, 12 years. And I've really seen the way the conversations have evolved in terms of depth, breadth, and richness. So thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here. Wipro started our formal sustainability journey around the same time that you said TCS did, around 2007, 2008. And I have a hypothesis of why some of us IT companies started around the same time, including Infosys. It partly has to do with the profile of our employees, which by and large is very young. And at that point of time itself, we thought that sustainability is something that is going to be a differentiator in the talent marketplace. The customer marketplace, of course, but in the talent marketplace, it's something that engages them and they use, in a variety of decisions in their daily lives, as well as probably in the companies that they choose to work for. And I think research subsequently has sort of established that quite clearly, right? I'm going to speak about one goal each from ESG for Wipro. We have an ESG dashboard, a core dashboard of about 7 goals and an extended dashboard of about 12 goals. What differentiates between the 10 is how closely they are interlinked with business strategy. So I'll just choose one from each and talk very briefly about it. And I'll try to articulate how that is linked with business strategy and core business metrics. The first in E is, no prizes for guessing. It's climate change, of course. And many large companies, we've been working on climate change for the last 15 years, but we set net zero goals 2 years back in alignment with the SBTi framework. So we have a scope 1 and 2 net zero goal for 2030 and a scope 3 net zero goal for 2040. One of the reasons for that is, this differentiation is scope 3, like many companies, is 80% of our footprint. Scope 1 and 2 is just 20%. And scope 1 and 2, of course, is, as we all know, something which is within our operational control. So yes, so 100% renewable energy and net zero by 2030. That's one. The scope 3, is a big challenge by itself, which I'll not get into. If we have time, we can talk about that. Now, very clearly, we see this as linked with business metrics from, all the 3 primary parameters: revenues, costs, and risks. I think all of us know that investments in resource efficiency or energy efficiency have one of the clearest cases of financial returns. So investments in resource and energy efficiency translating into cost efficiencies have been proved many times over. So the linkages between energy efficiency and cost savings is all there, and we've seen that many times over through our investments in green buildings. There are a lot of metrics that we have on that. The second, as far as revenue is concerned, and that's what Michelle talked about, in the last 3-4 years, we've seen this rising groundswell of engagement from customers who want to collaborate with IT services companies on solutions for their own sustainability goals. And there's clearly a big opportunity area, so therefore the revenue linkage is, all out there. The third is risk. I think investors and customers and other stakeholders are asking questions of all companies as to what are you doing in climate risks? Have you analyzed and assessed it in detail? So what can you tell us about that? Right. So the climate change business drivers linkages are very clear. The second goal, which is from the S, is again, something that all of us, have been doing, which is on inclusion and diversity. And here again, I would like to say that IT companies started on the inclusion and diversity journey more than 15 years back, driven by the profile of the kind of employees that we have. And so, yes, it's just not a good thing to do. It has a vital linkage with, the kind of talent that we are able to attract. If you don't do I&D, the fact that you will be a laggard in the talent marketplace needs no elaboration, and I'm sure B schools will come out with detailed case studies on this, but it's all out there. So that's number 2. Number 3, on governance, one of the, there are of course several, well-known areas of corporate governance that are part of the dashboard, but one thing which is very pertinent to IT companies is the governance of responsible technology, which is a horizontal for us, which is how do you look at cybersecurity, data privacy, and responsible artificial intelligence, both internally and externally. So these are, board stakes. These are something that you're expected to, execute flawlessly in your engagements with customers as well as internally. So responsible technology has clear linkages with, customer satisfaction as well as with your reputation in the marketplace. So 3 examples from E, S, and G that have clear business linkages. Thank you.
Thanks. So obviously what we heard is that it makes a lot of business sense, especially for the technology companies, because customers are now, they are asking for it, and hence you can actually charge these services. I'll now move to Bipin, who represents FMCG sector. And from his vantage point, what does he see in terms of material issues in FMCG sector, and how has he operationalized it in Marico?
Thanks, Madhurika. So friends, I represent a company called Marico Limited, and an important disclosure, we do not make Mari biscuits. Okay. So we are in the business of making healthy and wellness products. So some of the brands probably you would be aware are Parachute, Saffola, Shanti. So they are in edible oil, hair oil, cosmetics, skin care products, hair care products, breakfast cereals. So these are the product portfolio we have, and predominant business in India, but we do have operations in Bangladesh, Vietnam, Egypt, South Africa, and some of the Middle East countries. So as I said, our product portfolio is in the domain of healthy and wellness product solutions. Typical material issues for our business are related to maybe 85% of our raw material is coming from agricultural produce commodities. So that is an important area for us. Water becomes an important area since it is connected to us. Our products are packaged into plastics, and hence circular economy becomes an important area for us. Diversity and inclusion, I think without fail, every company will be an important area for us. And we are into a product or FMCG company, hence what is a sustainability attribute of our products? That is an emerging and important area for us. Considering all these various aspects of businesses and material issues, we started our program in 2015 and had phase 1 from in initial years, take a lot of initiatives, and there is a lot of improvement which we did in the areas of our own influence. Our phase 1 ended in 2022, and we started our phase 2, which is 22 to 30. We call it as 2030 ambition for Marico, which has got 8 focus areas in material issues which I spoke about, and around 55 key material issues are there, or KPIs are there, where we have taken very specific targets for 2030. Now, making ambition and making targets or disclosing thing is not good enough. We also need to have a program around it. As Madhulika was also talking about, sustainability has become a full-fledged function or mainstreaming now. So we have created a simple measurement system for our operations. There are 3 verticals. One is credibility. So what kind of credibility your program has? What are your different ratings with certain agencies? How much of your data you disclose is assured? How much your disclosure aligned with different standards? What kind of capability building you have done for internal team? All these things is part of the credibility basket. Second is ESG performance improvement. So whatever the targets you have talked about, how many of targets have achieved their yearly or short-term targets, and how many programs are directed towards your final outcome. And third is business integration. Probably I feel that is the most important element or the measurement one has to do in programs. Because when you're shifting from an initiative to a program, you're supposed to integrate sustainability principle in each function. And until unless that is done, it still remains as an initiative across the organization where a larger team takes care of it. So what we said that it is important to understand what are the sustainability aspects or principles are there for each function. Let's identify that. Let's have KPIs around it for each function, so that they are targeting or they are working or creating programs for their functional KPIs, not as a sustainability target of the organization. And that helps in making improvement in ownership of people and driving the agenda across the organization. That we started, and in last few years we are getting a good response from people, and that is helping us to improve foundation of sustainability program in our organization. I think this is good enough to do a comment, and we will discuss as we go, take the discussion forward.
No, thanks, Vipin. And now I'll move on to Jayant, and we'll hear from him how his organization has offered sustainability as a service and making it as a business case. Over to you, Jayant.
Thank you, Madhulika, and thank you, fellow panelists, for sharing initiatives that are going on in your organization on sustainability. And thank you to CII for giving me this opportunity to speak amongst such esteemed guests that I have. I would first like to introduce my organization, because not everyone would be aware of Lindstrom. So Lindstrom is basically a Finland headquartered textile service organization. We are present in 23 countries worldwide, and in India we've been in operation since 2007. In India we've got 12 business units spread across the country, and just based on some numbers, actually sharing first what is a textile servicing company. Basically, we handle the workwear for all different segment of customers. So typically for a layman, workwear would mean uniforms. So we are an organization that handle the uniform management at any organization, be it manufacturing firm, service industry, or even any different segment of business that we look at. We've, just for some numbers, we have almost about 2,000 customers across India from all different segments, and we provide workwear to almost 700,000 people force in the country on any given point of time. And of course, that would mean that we have in circulation almost about 3 million garments that are in current circulation in the country. Textile waste, as you know, is one of the biggest challenges that the world is seeing. And therefore, being a textile service company, I think we are going to be leaders in terms of taking sustainability as a priority in our vision and strategy. Our science-based targets were approved in 2021, and we are one of the first textile service companies to look at becoming or reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and becoming net zero by 2050. Now, how this becomes very important is that we have built in circular economy or circularity into our business model. When we talk about the 3 Rs of reduce, reuse, and recycle. That's the basic starting point of our business model. When we look at any textiles that we manufacture or produce and then service our customers with, we look at how we could reduce overproduction of these textiles, for which there are various initiatives that we've taken. Like we have something called a very innovative system of production on demand, where even if a single garment is required by the customer, the garment is only produced on that request, and we do not overstock and keep stocking of garments or overproduce garments. Similarly, when we talk about reuse, we are also looking at the life cycle of a fabric, how the life cycle or the fabric is chosen so that we can increase the life cycle of the fabric for a certain period of time. So there is a lot of science that goes behind even selecting fabrics that we supply to our customers in terms of their workwear. Again, how this fabric can then be recycled, and again brought back into circulation with new garments. That's again something that we look at. Similarly, even in so textiles are one part of the business model. The other is servicing the customers, because all these textiles are brought back to our business units where we actually look at washing them and then delivering fresh textiles to our customers. There again, with our laundry processes, we look at how we could maximize the life of the textiles. So just to share with you, every year we repair almost 4.5 million garments so that they can continue to be in use. Similarly, over a period of 1990 to 2020, we have been able to reduce our water consumption by almost 50%, because water, when you are washing and you have a laundry, water is one of the main inputs that is used. Like I was mentioning, that we have signed up for these science-based targets, and where we actually come in is that we are coming in with a lot of reusable products for our customers. So, typically how we can reduce their carbon footprint, because as Mr. Narayan was mentioning, we come as the scope 3, or we come in the scope 3 of our customers, and that's, a substantial chunk that they are looking at reducing, and that's how we support them in reducing. Just for an example, that one service line that we have is mat services, entrance matting. So that reduces mopping of floors in any facility by almost 70%, because the dust and dirt that enters your facility is reduced right at the entrance itself, thereby saving water and detergents. Of course, is some of the savings that we get. Similarly, we have service lines like roll towels, where we eliminate the entire usage of paper napkins. So that's another way that we help our customers. So I think from the service point of view, it becomes very important what we bring in for the customer, and how we not only look at our own sustainability goals, but also help customers reduce their carbon footprint. So that was how we move forward with our customers.
Thanks, Jayant. We'll now move to some specific questions. So first question goes to you, Michelle. Being a tech company, your views on how ESG-centric technologies can prove to be vital in ensuring the commitments of companies towards their sustainability goals.
Thanks for that. Look, just as I start into that, I wanted to comment a little on, just like we went through the digital change in organizations, we had to build up skills, build up capability, realized it went into the CXO and to the board levels. We've seen a similar thing with sustainability. However, the CXO, CTO is still probably one of the last to the table at this point in time that we're seeing. They're understanding that they can actively contribute to a company's net zero goals, both in the actual business itself and enabling, whether that be IoT, whether that be measurements, supply chain, value chain measurement end-to-end, and tracing and tracking, scope 1, 2, 3 tracing and tracking, and communications, and obviously disclosure. Those ones are easy, but some of those earlier ones, they're still getting their heads around. But also for services-based organizations, IT is becoming a material issue. So the amount of emissions coming out of their escalating use of AI and ML requires a really major rethink. And so thinking from a green IT perspective and bringing technical, the IT group along with ESG is key. And some of the evidence that we can see is we did a survey in APAC, involving University of Auckland, looking at digital and sustainability, and it was a first in the first world index that helped demonstrate that bringing those two together can actually bring a competitive advantage to an organisation, and that was certainly the belief of the organisations. And so in doing that, there's really a couple of key things that is key to ensuring that, and really that's data, data and data. And so ESG for a long time has sat on the outside, or sustainability metrics, and we've heard many comments today, but bringing it into the core of your enterprise, rethinking your data architecture, and understanding how the CIO and CTO are enablers to that is a really core part, because it's only going to get worse, guys. I don't think it's going to get any better. Key to that is where you're first starting. So if you're a mature organisation, you understand your material issues, you understand your KPIs, but sometimes if you're starting out and you're a smaller group, you can actually try to boil the ocean. Guys, start small, and so understanding, and I know everyone says this, but people get carried away, those basic, what is the most important thing that you can impact, and therefore build a baseline around that. So when I go data, 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 it's then understanding how you will measure, what are the KPIs and how you'll improve on that. And then the other piece is around how you will communicate that. And so part of the sharing more regularly, sharing in a way that your different stakeholders understand is part of that enablement. I think that's really key. So yeah, I'll end there.
Thanks. Moving on from technology to a totally diverse subject, over to you, Juhi. So, what are the strategies that as Tetra Pak you are trying to develop from a renewable packaging perspective? Because that's a lot of fear on the packaging, especially for the FMCG sector. And how are you focusing on responsible sourcing of raw materials in India? That also claims, aims to conserve biodiversity and also reduce the climate risk.
Thank you for the question, Madhulika. Before I deep dive into specific efforts on what we are doing in terms of packaging, let me talk about the current structure of paper-based cartons. So in a current structure, the paper-based carton, Tetra Pak has 70% of paperboard, which is responsibly sourced from FSC certified forests. And then 25% of it is polymer and 5% which is aluminium to provide the barrier properties required to keep the content within the package safe. So that's the packaging structure. Talking about our endeavor is to make one of the most sustainable packaging, which is renewable, more recyclable, which is carbon neutral, and which is responsibly sourced. So there are multiple efforts that we are doing both in upstream and downstream to realize that ambition. On the upstream, we have multiple packaging innovations that we are doing. We are trying to put more fiber into our packaging and replacing the aluminium barrier which is there currently, looking at plant-based polymers or fiber-based barriers. Other thing is that we are also doubling down on our plant-based innovations, whether it is the tops, polymers, or the coating within the packaging. We are putting more plant-based offerings for the customers, which is not only going to reduce our carbon emissions, but also provide renewability. Again, in terms of sourcing, all our materials is coming from third-party certified entities like FSC. For our paper, we are going for FSC certified forest. For plant-based material, we are taking Born Sucrose certification. There are other identities also like Aluminium Stewardship Initiative that we are part of. All these standards ensure that we are restoring nature, we are protecting diversity, biodiversity, and also protecting the flora and fauna. So those are some of the initiatives. Apart from that, we are also working on deploying recycled content in our packaging, which will help us drive more circularity. In some of the markets like Europe, we've also introduced something which is called tethered caps, where the caps remain on the package even after it is disposed, so that it lessens the littering. Those are some of the efforts on the upstream side. On the downstream side, Tetra Pak has been working to create that ecosystem for collection and recycling for used cartons for over 2 decades now. We have collection and recycling operations in more than 70 countries. Last year, we spent about 30 million euros for collection recycling, and in the next few years, we are trying to take that investment up to 120 million euros. If you look at India, We are working in 30 plus partners across India who are collecting and aggregating used cartons while Tetra Pak is incentivizing them. We are also working with strategic recyclers, one of which is ITC, and a couple of others, Deluxe, Eastern Cargo, and a couple of others. So the idea is that the used cartons, which has value, the awareness is not there. The packaging waste is of value. The idea is to create that awareness and ensure that this used carton goes into recycling stream rather than ending up into landfills. So I think awareness has also been a very important area that we have been putting our efforts in. We have many programs with multiple organizations focused on waste segregation at source so that the waste is not waste, but rather a value material. We are also working to make the cartons into desks and benches, which are then donated to underserved schools, again, not only to emphasize the importance of collection recycling, but also to serve a social purpose. A couple of other programs that we have are working towards upliftment of the waste worker society because they are the backbone of the entire waste sector. So we are working to provide them access to education, to healthcare, and livelihood opportunities. So these are some of the programs both on upstream and downstream that Tetra Pak has been working on and will continue to emphasize its efforts on. Thank you.
Thanks, Juhi. Obviously, a lot of actions and, actually truly integrating sustainability into your product offerings for customers like us. Moving over to you, Mr. Narayan, we were just talking before this session on the, the accelerated pace of evolution of the regulations around ESG, starting with the BRSR and the core BRSR, then the EU Green Deal, and then, of course, the ISSB coming with S1 and S2. So what do you think are the challenges, from a sustainability professional perspective for large global companies like yours and the multiple, and a large organization like yours would be touching multiple regulatory mandates and then across the world. And so how would you be preparing for the emerging dynamics of the ESG disclosures around the world?
Right. And I think one of the things we were discussing is that this proliferation of regulatory mandates on disclosures, ESG disclosures. India was the forerunner, 10 years back, 2012, when we started with business responsibility reporting. But now we have here, from across the world. Even seasoned veterans in sustainability are struggling to catch up and trying to wrap their heads around what all this means. It's an acronym soup, EU, for example, in November 2022, they passed CSRD as a mandate, which is corporate sustainability reporting disclosures. Then they added ESRS standards to that I think in July, just a month back. In the US, we have ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. Then, of course, you have the US SEC coming out with its own, disclosure requirements across. So I think here's how companies, should look at this whole challenge that is coming up. Large companies have been engaged with, corporate sustainability disclosures for quite some time. So that will, of course, give them some advantage. However, there are several challenges that, are right out there. One of the first things to do for companies is to see what applies to you. For example, in EU, they have some criteria on how soon are you expected to disclose on this. If you have more than 20 million euros in your balance sheet assets, 40 million euros of sales, and more than 250 people in any subsidiary that you may have in Europe or in any large branch in Europe, then you have to start reporting to EU requirements as early, I think, as FY26. Yes, or FY25. Yes, FY25, depending on where you fit in. But here's the thing. Even if you don't fall or meet any of these criteria, it's very likely, especially if you have, some global footprint and you have exports, as a supplier, you will be asked to disclose on many of these requirements from European companies. So whichever way you look at it, I think you need to prepare for EU's requirements, and EU's CSRD requirements are very rigorous, they're very comprehensive, and they ask a lot of you. For example, they ask you to follow the double materiality approach, which in simple terms is what is your impact and what is the impact on you, or what are your financial risks and what are the impacts on society. And they also ask you to follow the EU taxonomy, and they ask you to link that with your financial statements. I'll give you one example. For example, let's say you're working on climate change or water conservation or waste management, whichever, that typically falls under a taxonomy category called DNSH, which is do no significant harm, as some of you are aware. So that is something that companies have been doing in terms of quantifying and measuring their environmental metrics. However, now you have to link that with your balance sheet or P&L parameters in terms of saying how the linkages actually happen. So that's the financial materiality that is coming in, which is, of course, investor-led and regulator-led now. If you look at ISSB and SEC, which is the US standards, they're not as expansive as the EU, but they focus a lot on climate change, a lot. And one thing common between them and EU is that they also ask you to quantify your environmental impacts in terms of monetary valuation, in terms of financial materiality. How are you measuring climate change risks? How are you measuring climate change opportunities? And you're supposed to answer that not at a generic level, but very specific to your sector, to the geography that you're operating from, the methodology that you're using, and how does that translate into a risk for you, right? So what all of this is going to result in, therefore, as I see it, is you're going to see a mushrooming of the valuation ecosystem. You're going to have multiple methodologies, multiple organizations coming out with different ways of putting a financial value to your environmental impact. And that again is going to, it's going to result in this challenge of interoperability, or how do I sort of, have a certain kind of consistency across these methodologies, which is really the big ask for practitioners today, right? The good thing is, you do have help from all across in terms of frameworks, in terms of organizations that can, help you take the first few steps. At Wipro, for example, we've been doing something called an environmental profit and loss statement for the last 7 years, which we publish as part of our annual report. So we put a monetary value to our environmental impact, and we know exactly now, for example, we know that the monetary value of our environmental impact is about 2.7% of our revenues and 15% of our EBIT, or of our net profits. And we know where each of that is coming from. One of the first surprises we got when we did this valuation about 7 years back is it wasn't greenhouse gases, but air pollution that was the biggest contributor to our environmental footprint, about 50 to 60%. And then when we delve deep into it, we realized that is because of our upstream thermal power, which is still 40%. Our energy footprint is 60% renewable energy, but 40% is still thermal. So the upstream of that, and the air pollution associated with a lot of electronic products that we buy, the cloud services that we use, as well as the laptops and desktops, all of them have very significant upstream air pollution impact. So yes, so that is just an example, but I think whether you are a large company or a medium or small company, we'll have to start preparing for these regulatory mandates on ESG and financial materiality that's coming out from across the world.
Thanks. That's a lot. Well, simply said, but that's a lot. Moving from one important stakeholder, which is regulators and the regulations that are coming, I'll now move to Bipin, and one of the important stakeholders upstream in your value chain is your farmers and the agricultural community. So would like to hear from you, Bipin, how does Marico collaborate with local farmers and agricultural communities in India to promote sustainable agricultural practices, thereby ensuring responsible and resilient supply chain?
Thanks, Madhulika. So I think farming is a very different sector as far as India is considered when you compare with Europe or countries. In India, the land holding is so small that if you wanted to create an impact, you have to work with so many people, convince them and carry out a change. So just if you look at from a coconut producing communities, there are 4 states in India who are predominant coconut producers. Now, coconut as a tree is having a life of around 60 to 70 years, which is 2 to 3 generations if you consider owner of that particular farm. And then a belief system also changes from generation to generation. So if you want to create an impact and you want to influence multiple people, I think the best way is to identify what are their problems which they are facing up, solve their problems, and while solving these problems, you suggest practices which are more sustainable, and then with results, you tell them, this is what you have achieved, and probably that helps to propagate it further. The sustainable coconut farming or sustainable agriculture will always promoted in India if there is a benefit to farmer. Otherwise, considering their current conditions, you will not be in a position to talk about it. So what we did in 2017, we created a program which is named as Kalpariksha. It's a Sanskrit word, I think everybody understands it's a name for coconut. The idea of this program is that we need to go to farms ourselves. So we identified and trained 140 agronomists who are trained on scientific cultivation of coconut. And we asked them to visit farms, identify what are their problems, and then suggest different solutions, either in terms of soil management, water management, pesticides management, or selecting specific trees which can give you more yields, etc. And then, since we are going, it's a free of cost consultation happening to farmers. In the initial period, a few people got interested and they started implementing those practices. After 1 year, we did a study where these practices are implemented and then where traditional way of working is going on. We observed there is 15% improvement in the productivity of farms who have started practicing the way we are asking them to do it, or where they have understood that right way of doing farming. So this helped us in promoting these practices, and then mouth publicity from one to other person. When the person is talking about self-progress or self-experience to others, I think belief is more. Then we organized multiple model farm trainings where people are talking about it. We created a website, we created call centers where people can call and then talk about their issues, and then we can provide them solutions on these things. So these things, last 5 years, things are going on in a rapid mode. Till date, around 81,000 farmers are associated with these programs. They are enrolled and they are talking to us, and then they are getting benefit because of these things. So are solutions very great? Probably not. These are probably solutions which are known, or any good educated person in agriculture will know these things. But what is important is that you create a convincing success story which people will have belief, and then that creates a trust. Once trust is created, there are more and more people associated with. So once these things are going on, then we started talking about intercropping, because 2 coconut trees are planted a little bit away from each other. And there is a provision that you can do more planting in between these 2 trees. So that helped to get more income for farmers as they were doing these things. Now, when we try to ensure that the farming is done in a sustainable way, it is important that we also try to get more income from them from the other sources. Because when you're doing an agricultural practices, you need agricultural material and you also need agricultural services. So we created a program called ABC, Agricultural Business Center, where we gave some funds to the next generation of farmers, and then help them to set up their businesses which can help the agricultural practices in a better way. So it worked in both ways. The Kalpariksha team can refer to ABCs and ABCs can refer to Kalpariksha teams, and which helped in promoting these practices in much more and faster way of taking this forward. Apart from that, we also did one program which is called a Jalashay, where if you need water, I think most of the farming is done with monsoon dependency. So we created farm ponds where Marico will participate by giving certain funds, and then the farmer will also participate to a certain extent. And these farm ponds then, they collect rainwater so that they can cater for 3 to 4 months in a year with rainwater, and then it also helps in improving the groundwater level for that particular farm. And eventually the groundwater aquifers got filled. So I personally feel that if you continue this program for next 10 years, there is a big change, and then self-dependency or self-economic dependency of farmers can be achieved through these things. So what we intend to do is that we are trying to get more and more people associated to these programs. We also appeal that anybody who has an expertise in agricultural domain or in water management, we are very much open. We can collaborate together, because last mile person should get benefited with these things. And then if that happens, then overall coconut probably cultivation industry will get benefited because of these things.
Thanks, Vipin. Jayant, we are on the last question, and we heard about how you are offering, weaving sustainability as a, proposition to your customers. So would really like to listen on what are the challenges that you're facing in developing and managing a sustainable value chain in, giving sustainable solutions to your customers.
Yeah, thanks, Madhulika. I think I'll borrow a little bit from what Bipin was saying, is that, it has to have both forward and backward linkages. And I believe, creating of that ecosystem and the infrastructure becomes extremely important. Now, if we just look at the textile industry, in India, it's still very unorganized. Getting suppliers to, sign off environmental targets, it's not something that they are used to doing. So, but getting them to do this so that tomorrow we could move away from these fibers to bio-based fibers. This requires a mindset change. This requires us to create that ecosystem. Like today we are working, and it requires partnerships to build in. We are working with NALCO. We are all aware that India is a high water stressed zone. So we are currently working with NALCO, another leader in their industry, to come up with a water recycling plant where we can recycle 100% of the water, because till now, whatever successful technologies have been, we could only recycle about 70% of the water, because you need to maintain certain parameters in the water if you have to flow it back into the soil. So, you then start working with partners such as this to develop solutions to recycle water. If you look at the other place that we are working on is renewable energy. But, even getting renewable energy across my 12 different business units, the kind of consumptions that we have, whether we have the infrastructure ready already to provide those kind of renewable energy sources that we require. Similarly, when I look at the other place that we are focusing on is our deliveries to our customers, because obviously that leaves a high amount of carbon footprint when it's a delivery vehicles are traveling across the length and breadth of the country and delivering to our customers. Now, if we are looking at moving to EV vehicles, do we really have the infrastructure to support such initiatives? And that's where, I think what, the panelists here were also saying, that you need to also be very realistic about it. That whether at one go can you move to an EV when you do not have options available, or does it make sense first moving into an option like a CNG and then looking to move to an EV? So all these things need to be kept in mind, and it is, like I always keep mentioning, it is developing the ecosystem and the partnerships together, because an organization alone cannot work and achieve its targets without the support of the entire ecosystem. So that's something that I would like to add.
Thanks, Jayant. So we have heard from the panelists, we have actually exhausted the time which was allotted for this panel, but you have heard that, you have to work, you have to adopt technology, you have to work with your stakeholders, you have to get aligned with regulations. So that's what is a normal day for a sustainability professional at large organizations. If you're ready to bear with us and for another 5 minutes till your evening drinks are served, we can take a couple of questions from the audience if there's an appetite for one at the end of the day. There's one right here. So we said two, so there's one gentleman here right in the center, and then the next one is here on the first table. Can someone give a mic or...
Hi, good evening. My name is Pushpendra Johri and I am from RMSI. My question primarily is emerging from what Mr. Narayan was saying, that as part of a lot of European requirements, we need to disclose the risks also. So my primary question to, in fact, to all of you, is that how are you taking into account the risks, the physical risks, primarily those which might come through climate change related shocks, and which have the ability to, totally derail your entire net zero journey? That's it.
Do you want to take it or I can answer? Yeah. So, good question. And this is the first time, at least in the day, I've heard about climate adaptation coming into the center of the conversation. So, for a large organization, and I'm talking on behalf of ITC, we understand that because most of our raw materials come from nature-based solutions, climate change and adaptation and understanding the risk is primary to us. And hence what we have done is we have taken an approach where we have done a macro level analysis of all these sites in across India, understand their climate risks at a macro level, and then where it is very vulnerable in terms of there are more than one risk that a site is going to have, then we have started doing a deep dive. Believe me, the deep dive takes time and a lot of resources, but that's how the approach that we have taken. And very important question, and it's all the more difficult to quantify it, but we are attempting at that. Mr. Ryan, would you like to add to it, or that's it?
I think one of the things that larger companies have been answering, responding to CDP, I mean, there's an entire section on climate change risks. So they've been, trying to calculate climate change risks, but using their own rules of thumb. What is needed is two things. One is you need a certain consistency of approach, but you also need sectoral, variations to be incorporated into the methodology. One of the things that we did, like ITC, 5 years back, is we did do a city-level climate change risk assessment for the 10 major cities we operate from in India and also outside of India, right? So you need to get that to that level of detail and translate it into, the typical, risk outcomes like damage to physical infrastructure, business continuity risk, employee productivity and absenteeism issues, and so on. It's still an emerging science, and I've seen even seasoned risk practitioners, because they don't understand climate science well enough, they struggle with it. So it needs risk practitioners and sustainability professionals to come together and work on this.
Very well said. There was a question here right in the front, so if you can move the mic.
Hi, this is Kapil from Accenture. Since there are people from technology and sustainability farming side, so I just want to ask a question. You mentioned about you help farmers. Did you also sort of thought of some initiatives of how technology can be applied in farming, and maybe now there's a lot of buzz around AI ML. Any use cases you would have thought how AI ML can be used in helping farmers, or some of the use cases in making maybe around soil or something like that. Any use cases you would have thought?
Vipin, you can answer this question.
Yeah. So you're right. I think technology has started playing some role, and I don't know whether you are aware. Last year, Marico's one more arm is there, Marico Innovation Foundation. So we did a hackathon, or we did one day event where we asked all the agricultural tech companies to come together, and we gave them 6 specific problems related to agricultural issues where we are looking for solutions. And few of the solutions definitely they come, and then we are taking certain you can say experiments which are going on where we are trying to look at how they can reduce some of the pain points in agriculture. Some of the points just to explain is on soil management, of course. What is the water content of soil, or how fast you can give soil testing. Second is on water management. What is the current requirement of the water, and then can you automate the entire water management process. Third is very interesting, where the weather patterns or changing patterns can be identified, and then the information can be given to farmers So we are working out, we have created an app in Kalpataksha where we are trying to push this kind of an information to farmers, whether that should probably help them to, so it is a slow process. I can't comment you that it will create an immediate change, but these kind of things have already started, and I could see in another 4-5 years, a lot of things may change in the way we do agriculture.
And so, as you're highlighting, there are many technical solutions coming. So, adding to what Bhavan's talking about, I think the really interesting point that I'll add is something that started with TCS around our digital farming solutions, started from more of a social perspective, trying to help smallholders in the way that they manage their lots and increase. But the really interesting part is it's actually increasing the revenue and their ability to generate higher returns off the same amount of land. And that comes through decreased use of chemicals, decreased use of water, but also information about when do you harvest, what's the right price time for markets. And the last part that's interesting is starting in India, it's actually gone out to different parts. So we've found this has become much more commercial and being applicable globally coming out of India.
Thanks to my esteemed panelists here for sharing your insights, your challenges, and transparently disclosing your journey on addressing some of these challenges. And thank you, the audience, for being so, patient. And yeah, thanks everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, as this session ends, we thank our esteemed guests for their valuable contribution to the discussion. I kindly invite you all for a group photograph, please. Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude today's sessions. We trust that you found today's discussion enriching and informative. Tomorrow we will reconvene at 9:30 in the morning to have enlightening sessions on the second day of 18th Sustainability Summit. I thank all the attendees and kindly encourage everyone to join for the networking dinner. Thank you. Good night.